and welcome to Flavours of Ulster.
We'll not only be showing you the origins of our fabulous produce here in Northern Ireland, we'll be giving you a few recipes as well. We're also delighted to come into the kitchen where we're joined by Chef Callum Irwin
as we find diverse and delicious flavours of Ulster. Hello and welcome to Flavours of Ulster. Today we're in County Armagh with over 10,000 apple trees and 100,000 apples pressed every single year. Let's take a look behind the Armagh Cider Company. Philip, what a beautiful place you have here, and what a history. I mean, your family, they've been here since the 1800s.
Yes, my great-grandfather bought this place in 1898. So we're here just about 125 years.
It wasn't all about the apple juice and the cider back then, though.
No, far from it. At that point in time, it would have been a very mixed farm. Dairy cows, dry stock, hens, pigs. Very, very mixed. Basically all farms in Ireland at that time were.
So you were producing apples for other people perhaps and for your own consumption, but not necessarily to sell. What changed along the way?
We became generally much more apple orientated through the 60s and 70s to become generally an apple farm. And then we became an apple and horse breeding establishment. In the late 80s, it has continued from there. And then we've diversified from apple production into the production of cider.
Now, you would have produced and grown apples for others, your family, back in the day. So you would have been selling them off, I suppose, like everybody did. What was the change that changed the family from, supplying to actually becoming producers yourselves?
It was basically a decision that we had to become in more control of our produce. And in many ways, I wanted to become a price maker, because I generally describe farmers as being price takers. Exactly. I've maybe realised I'm a price taker in a different industry, but we have now control. We can say no, which is basically very empowering. Cider making is actually wine making. Cider is apple wine. So we're absolutely nothing to do with the beer industry or the brewing industry. We are winemakers. And winemaking is science over art. And the science bit you can generally learn. The art bit comes from experience. And experience comes with mistakes.
The one thing that you probably focused on back then that you've carried through to today, which is very evident, is that handcrafted element of your cider. Yes,
and that is the brilliant production of quality products in an area. And the artisan cider makers, as I would describe we are, basically use the apples of the area. So every area's cider is somewhat different.
And what's the cider then here? What is particular about this cider in this area?
The cider in this area uses Bramleys, which are basically the apple of choice in County Armagh. And that's the craft in the craft cider industry. The big cider makers make their ciders usually with apple juice concentrate.
So the Bramley apple then plays a huge part in your cider. It's a kind of tart apple.
It is, but that's what it brings to cider. It brings acidity and crispness and a dryness. But what it doesn't bring is alcohol, because it's very low in sugar. So it probably, with pure Bramley cider, you'd push to get 3.5% alcohol. But one of the major constraints with Bramley is now a major advantage to us as a cider maker. And that constraint is, as an apple, it is triploid.
And what is triploid?
Triploid has to do with its chromosome makeup.
So you're getting very scientific now, you say.
Yes, well, we're there. But it generally means that the variety will not self-pollinate. So Bramley is the apple of choice in County Armagh, but it means in every Bramley apple orchard in County Armagh, there's lots and lots of eating apples. And they're there to maximise the Bramley crop. They're there to cross-pollinate.
Oh, right, okay. So you need one to get the other.
Yes. And those guys are where we get our alcohol in our ciders. So we harvest all our eating apples, and we have actually, on the farm, when we started to make cider, we have planted orchards of eating apples, as well as the eating apples that are in the middle of the Bramleys. So we harvest our eating apples, that's where we get our alcohol, and the more different varieties of apples you use in the cider, the more complex and rounded the flavour is. But there's also a third type of apple we use in the production of cider. And we have probably the only commercial orchard of it in County Armagh. And that's apples specifically for the production of cider. That's where our tannins come from.
Oh, the tannins, right, okay,
And
yes.
that adds another taste profile to the ciders. And last year, we had a reasonable year, we made quite a lot of cider. This year, actually, in apple production, it's quite poor. We had a really, really dreadful spring.
Is that because of the weather then? You're very
Yes.
dependent, like so many different farming industries, you're dependent on the weather.
Yes, we live the weather forecast. It's quite simple.
Like in my house, growing up on a farm, you listen to about 5 weather forecasts a day.
Yes, and 5 more on your phone during the day
Yes, exactly.
to see when the next shower of rain is due to come in. But yes, we generally live climate change, to be quite honest.
So you've got the harvest, you've started off with the blossom, you've got the harvest, and then the pressing. So from pressing to bottling, how does that process work?
Well, you go through the fermentation process. After we press, we add yeast, we set the cider aside, and as I said, we're making wine. So we have bulk tanks, the cider ferments, we taste it through fermentation, we test it when fermentation's over. We do the same as they do, exactly the same as they do with wine, we rack it. And that's to lift the cider off what we call the lees, the cloudy bit at the bottom.
Oh, right, okay. There would have been a few name brands that made it big in tonic world, and now you notice if you're out and about, people will almost not just ask for a gin by name, but the tonic also by name. So is it about getting into that market?
Yes, exactly. And the big growth for a period of years there, probably slowed a little bit now, was in gins. And every gin needs a tonic. And we make a range of different tonics, basically. And with a lot of the artisan gin manufacturers now, they've realised that there's more mileage in pairing with a local product. And whenever I travel, I want to utilise local products. I want to go into a bar in Ontario or New York and drink the local beer, possibly drink the local gin or whatever. Our ciders are taken in by most of the supermarkets. Our tonics are a harder sell because of the very, very big brands. And we find the supermarket basically has to take a brand out to put ours in. But the tourist industry would be our saviour there, because the hotels, and particularly the 5-star hotels, are more willing to use local products.
So Philip, you have a really busy farmyard, you have the stud, you have loads of things going on, but you're also expecting a load of visitors here today as well to a perfectly set up table. I mean, tourism is a big part of what you do here, and you welcome people
Yes.
from all over the world.
People from all over the world. We do 2 or 3 tours a week. A lot of American visitors, but we have 2 or 3 at least groups in every week, and we basically cater for groups.
And they must love it here. It's just so authentic as well.
Well, we try and keep it like that. It's a bit rustic.
Rustic is good. We like rustic.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking to Philip all about the gorgeous cider and all the products, and also hearing that tourism plays a big part here. And I've managed to catch a group who are over from America. So we'll have to disturb them in their little bit of tasting to take, just to find out how they're getting on. Michael, I've disturbed you having a wee taste of the cider.
Yes.
Where exactly have you come from today?
Today we came from Dublin,
And you're over on a tour. So where in the States are you from?
from Naples, Florida.
Oh, Florida, lovely.
Yes, the weather is somewhat warmer than this.
A wee tad better than what we're getting here
We're
today.
having a hurricane today, so I guess
Well,
this is the place to be.
Yeah, thankfully we don't have too many hurricanes here.
No.
In County Armagh anyway. So have you spent a bit of time around the orchard and around the cider company here?
Yes, yes.
And
we've been
tell us what you think.
Well, I think it's wonderful. And judging from the samples we've had here today, they have an excellent operation going here. It's wonderful. Cider is just great, and the orchard is beautiful.
Are you a cider drinker then? Are you a cider fan? Or do you think this has managed to convert you a wee bit?
Yes, to all of it. Yes to everything.
So you've packed a case full of a few bottles maybe to take home with you?
Shh.
Well, I will let you continue on with your tasting and enjoy a little bite of lunch.
Thank you.
As well. Thank you so much.
Talking with you.
Thank you. You've so many different layers going on. I mean, people think of cider and they think an apple pressed and, but it's a complex process.
Yes, but we can also have single variety ciders. Like some single variety ciders are very, very popular. But we generally don't make a single variety cider. We make a cider with as many different varieties of apples as we possibly can.
So you know what you're making because you obviously have an idea of that market that you're making for. I mean, where would your markets be?
Well, we supply all the local supermarkets. We are an artisan cider producer, so we describe ourselves as a small batch producer. Now we produce fairly large quantities of cider, but we do it in small batches. And generally that means that the cider I'm going to sell next week is not yet in bottles.
Oh, right, okay.
We will only bottle it on demand.
Uh-huh.
And that's for two reasons. Basically, the cider keeps in vats, so that cushions our apple production. That cushions us from the good years and the bad years.
So you have diversified. I mean, looking around this beautiful showroom, you've everything from chutneys to tonic. It's really about giving the consumer something that wee bit different.
Yes, and the reason we went to other products is basically it utilises the machinery. We had to spend an awful lot of money on machinery just to bottle, never mind press. The press is a piece of equipment that sits on its own, but the bottling plant is a production line. And whenever we decided to go into the bottling plant, we put in a bottling plant much bigger than we initially needed. So we do a lot of contract bottling products for other people.
All right, okay. And it's another source of income as well, I suppose,
Exactly.
when things may be unpredictable.
Yes, but we also diversified our range because that gives us a bigger range. It utilises the plant. And it's not just cider, it's tonics,
I mean, is that something that you love, the innovation of new products, or are you constantly thinking or looking at other world markets thinking, right, I wouldn't mind doing this?
Well, if we see something that happens to be trending, we'll take a look at it and say, like, can we produce that? And what's the economics behind producing it? And possibly go for it. Artisan is growth, to be quite honest. And artisan lemonades, artisan tonics, that area is the growth area. With the growth in the tourism industry in Ireland, particularly here in Northern Ireland, and you've got to remember we've come from a very low tourist base. That's where I see our growth, and that's where our growth is coming from.
You're watching them come through your doors and you're offering that little bit extra here as well for tourists coming in.
Yes, yes. Well, it's another string to our bow, I would probably say.
You've many strings in this bow, I would say, Philip.
Yeah, I think it's a violin bow rather.
I was going to say more a violin bow. So what would your favourite product be? Or is that like asking you, who's your favourite child?
Yeah, it's a little bit like that, to be quite honest. Well, I like my ciders, and I like tasting my cider, but I like tasting other ciders. I love to go to Normandy and Brittany.
Normandy, lovely, yeah.
Beautiful ciders, very, very dry. Basque region in Spain, fabulous ciders. But again, exceptionally dry. And the taste for cider in Ireland is usually for something quite sweet.
I always remember in France when we were young and having to go around all these beautiful wineries, which you didn't really appreciate when you were about 8 or 9. And they would have talked about the angel share. And I always loved that. I was always transfixed by that. Is that something similar then when you're saying that the process is quite similar to wine?
The angel share in wine would, yes, the process is the same, but the angel share in wine is basically in ways lost. In spirits, the angel share is evaporation over years. With winemaking, that process will be much, much quicker. We take the wine, the cider off its lees, we put it back into a vat, we store it and we let it mature. All things are better when it matures a bit.
Absolutely. Philip, you're a man who's very passionate about apples. I can get that from you. Has this always been, I mean, you probably didn't have a choice when you were growing up?
No, there was apples on the farm. Whenever I was very young, this was a very mixed farm. And basically it became more and more concentrated.
Did you have to help out much when
yes.
you were younger?
Yes.
And what was your job then on the farm?
Everything. Even with the folk I employ now, I would say there's no such thing as that's not my job. Because I do everything, they'll do everything.
They have to do everything as well.
Yes.
Now, I grew up in a dairy farm, so it was great. My dad would have milked the cows in the morning, dropped the milk off in the windowsill. We would have had it for our breakfast. It was great. We would have had umpteen numbers of custard, milky puddings, milkshakes. Was it all about the apples then in your house? Did you have were you ever fed up? Was it all about apple tarts, apple crumbles?
Yes. Mum was a fantastic baker, and it was all about apple tarts and apple pies and apple crumbles and all the variations thereon, and with different varieties of apples as well. She preferred to cook with apples that weren't Bramley, actually. She preferred to cook with quite a strange variety called Monarch.
Right, okay. And how many? I mean, there are a lot of varieties, and the names, the apple names, just take me to the fair as well. Would you have many varieties growing?
We grew 26 different varieties of apples on the farm.
Right.
But one major variety, which was Bramley. It's probably now not the major variety. We're changing, and that's because of cider making. The farm is developing as well as the cider part of the farm. Production has to change. We have planted cider orchards. We have planted more eating apples because of the sweetness, and we're probably going to plant more eating apples again because one of the big growths is in artisan apple juice, not just cider. So we probably, at this moment in time, we have to buy in some, even with the amount of sweet apples, some more eating apples from fellow growers. But at least that's from fellow growers here in County Armagh.
Yeah, you're keeping it in-house almost. I think you're very lucky in the industry that you're in with cider. I mean, there's a romanticism there. You know, on a cool or on a really warm summer's day, a nice cider with a little bit of ice. But then it really comes into its own kind of autumn and winter. And you have also tapped into that market, that mulled cider, warm cider, cozy nights.
Yes.
I mean, it's almost written for you.
Yes, exactly. And cider sales, you see, would be generally quite seasonal. Cider sales increase dramatically during the summer months when it's warm and exactly that nice cold cider on a nice warm day. And to increase our sales, we've gone for mulled cider, and we do an apple punch as well, which some of the major supermarkets have just lifted. So we're supplying those with a very nice non-alcohol mulled product.
Well, you're taking over everywhere by the sounds of it, and a huge amount of work involved in that. I mean, what is next?
I would have to say we're probably making enough products. It's now expansion should be in marketing. Basically, that's where we're concentrating, is getting our products more reliable, more readily available.
Exactly. Well, the future of the Armagh Cider Company, I think it looks pretty healthy.
Well, I hope so.
And like a lot of farmers and apple growers and, you know, people in this industry, you're almost custodians of the land and creating a healthy picture for the future.
Well, that's exactly what I am. I don't describe myself as a landowner. I look after it for my time, and somebody else will look after it whenever I'm gone.
Well, you're making me want to try some of this, actually. Whetting the appetite for a little bit of cider. 0%, of course. Philip, thank you so much.
Not a
for
problem.
your
Hope
time.
you enjoy it.
Yeah,
And we'll let you taste some cider now in a second. Off camera.
And we have left the orchards of County Armagh for the kitchen. But we've managed to bring with us some apples and the delicious cider. I think we're just zooming in on the cider here,
Yes.
Callum. But I mean, County Armagh, the County Armagh Cider Company, just synonymous with apples and that crisp flavour. I'm sure you can just do so much with it as well.
Yeah, apples are a very, very versatile ingredient. On this dish here, we're doing it with a bit of pork belly, very cheap cut of meat would have been used. Ulster Scots would have used cheaper cuts of meat a lot, so we're going to braise it 160 degrees for about 3 hours. Again, very traditional cooking technique, just making sure we're tenderizing the meat there. We're going to do it with, we're going to braise the pork itself in the cider, so you'll get that flavour in the cider. And then we've got a Armagh roast apple puree, very, very beautiful. Got a wee bit of tang, a wee bit of sweetness, along with the celeriac remoulade, which has the apple through it, and then just a little bit of raw apple for the sourness.
Plenty of apples, plenty of
Yeah.
kind of biting through, and as you've talked about there, the pork as well. So tell us a bit about then this cut of meat.
So pork belly, it derives from the base of the pig, just over its rib cage. Very, very cheap, very fatty traditionally, but as I say, we're going to treat it differently than you would cook than you would treat, for example, a pork fillet. Pork fillet, you'll seal in a pan, run through the oven, but this here, we're going to braise it. So what I've done here is we have a mirepoix vegetable, so it's your carrot, onion, celery, and leek. I've roasted them off in a pan with a bit of rosemary and thyme.
I can smell.
It smells good,
just
doesn't it?
delicious. You can smell the thyme, the rosemary. It's just,
And then
Smells
we've
good.
got some pork stock. And this pork belly here, I've just taken it off the bone from a local pork supplier. Really, really good product. Just pop it on here. What the vegetables do, it actually prevents it all from burning at the bottom. So it's kind of like just holding it up away from the tray. And then we're going to get our cider. Now, the pork having a big round of fat on the top, we don't want to submerge the fat in liquid. We want it to get nice and crispy. So I'm just making
such a
sure.
crispy kind of pork belly.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it should be nice and tender in the middle and then crispy on top. So
When you talk about braising then for about 3 hours, I suppose that would have worked well when people years ago would have had the turf fires.
Exactly, yeah.
So kept it in the kitchen, cooking all day.
Slowly. And they
Slowly.
can go do their other chores and tasks, and they know in 3-4 hours they're going to have a beautiful dinner for their family. Now, this pork belly here, so this is what I made earlier. So this is the exact same process, Eve, but what I'm going to do is pop it into a pan. So anytime you're rendering down any fat, be it a duck or a pork belly, you always want to start off on a cold, dry pan.
I was going to say, a cold pan. And why do you start off with a cold, dry pan?
So a cold dry pan allows the fat on the top layer here to render slowly, and the natural fats will extract out of it and basically cook on its own meat. So you're just keeping the flavour in there. If you attack it with a hot pan, it'll burn very quickly. The flavour won't be great. So it's just about treating the ingredient with a bit of respect. So Eve, I think we're ready to plate here. As we can see this slowly rendering, I've showed you the process of braising the meat. Previously, I went through this process, so we've got 2 bits ready in the oven, which is very handy.
Good to go? Yep.
Yep, so I'm just going to put the dish together here. So I just took top and tail of the apple, took out the core, and literally roasted them in an oven tray at about 180 degrees for about half an hour until they're caramelised. All the sweetness, natural sweetness of the apple has came out, so that's why it's went to that colour. It's actually amazing. So you see the raw apple here, it's lovely and green and white, and then when you roast it, all the natural sweetness comes out and it turns into a lovely wee puree. I've knocked this back with a little bit of cider vinegar and a touch of brown sugar, and that's literally it.
Pork and apple forever have gone together.
They have. Pork and apple is a marriage made in heaven. And then we have a celeriac remoulade here. So celeriac from a local producer.
Now, celeriac is something that you see creeping more and more onto a menu. I think it started more with the celeriac puree, but it's starting to kind of become more accessible for people as well, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah. It's one of the ingredients. It's quite an ugly vegetable. So it's actually the root of celery. So it provides a very fresh and acidic taste. So the reason why I chose this ingredient was just to counteract with the sweetness of the apples there. We've julienned it down. We've macerated it in a bit of salt and lemon just to take the bite out of it. Wrung it off in a clean tea towel. We've got a wee bit of whole grain mustard in there, some capers, diced apple, and a fresh mayonnaise. So it should be really nice. This dish on a menu would probably be a starter. I'm just going to put a wee bit of julienne apple on top of our puree.
And is this just in a little bit of water? There's nothing else added to
just
this?
lemon water to stop it oxidizing there and to give it a wee bit of bite. Now I'm going to go behind you, Eve, and get our pork out.
Looks amazing. Looks fabulous.
We'll just pop that on the plate. This would probably be a starter.
This would be a starter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quite a big starter at that. Maybe
Quite a big starter.
I was a wee bit too generous with my cutting size.
I'm liking your style.
And then what I have here is a beautiful pork reduction.
So what's involved with this?
So we have pork bones
Smell.
roast in the oven. Yeah, you can see the viscosity of that. It's very, very nice. Pork bones, fried traditional with your mirepoix, roasted off, cold water. We're just down for a couple of days, and then we have red wine. We're just down to, it's a sort of a viscous liquid nearly, and then we just add our
Quite a lot of work in this and quite a lot of time.
There
but
is.
It's worth it by the...
Well, hopefully
what you get.
we're going to find out. So we just finish it off with a little bit of its sauce. And again, it's no waste. So back in the Ulster Scots days, they would have had a full pork, and we're just utilising everything.
So then they would have... Yeah, I mean, you're using the bones, you're using pork belly, you're using every little
And then
bit.
any offcuts and trim, but again, would go into your stock, and it's just building and developing the flavour.
Oh, that smells incredible. It really, really does.
Should be very good. And that's us. Armagh apples and pork belly at its finest.
Okay, I am looking forward to this.
Let's tuck in.
Let's tuck in. Now, is it something then you just eat the fat with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just, I suppose everybody is different and wow, it's just...
And I think in order to understand the dish, we should get a little bit all on the first bite.
Okay.
A bit of the puree, the remoulade, the pork, and then the fresh Armagh apples there.
Okay. Not the easiest to get onto a fork. Okay.
Very tasty.
Oh, that is delicious.
And you can see the cheaper cut of meat, braised and treated right, lovely and tender.
It's really tender. So that is, you know, you're talking about 3 hours in the oven, braising it. That's slow cooking, just really, really tender. And the apple just zings through it.
Yep.
This is just delicious. Absolutely gorgeous. And you've got that little sweetness as well with the puree.
Sweet, tang, touch of sharpness, depth of flavour in your pork reduction, and your remoulade just for a wee bit of acidic and freshness.
Absolutely.
Very well balanced dish.
Delicious. I'll try.
Utilising the Armagh apples in 3 different ways.
Just perfect.